This is lecture number 3 in the series Revelation, A Vision of Healing. My name is Sigve Tonstad. I'm Associate Professor of Religion at Loma University. The topics we will cover in this talk are the structure of Revelation, number 2, Revelation and its readers, schools of thought. And one aspiration, and when we look at schools of thought on this book, will be to extricate ourselves from the straitjacket that some of these schools have imposed on readers. Number 3, time and setting. Was there persecution at the time when the book of Revelation was written? And then I have a 4th point, dangers known and unknown for the recipients and the readers of this book. Now, the basic structure of Revelation is quite simple. There is a prologue, the first 6 verses. Then there is an epistolary section. Here, the messages to the 7 churches in Asia Minor. Then there is what you might call an apocalyptic section, a revelatory section, where the body of Revelation belongs to that section. There is a very marked transition point in chapter 4, verse 1, where John is asked to come up to heaven, and he will be shown what is to take place after that. And that section continues till the very end of the book. Then there is an epilogue, just so you see a symmetry between prologue and epilogue, some final things to be said at the end. Exhortations, promise, and so on. So it's quite nice the way this is laid out, and this is simple. And this, by the way, this basic structure, this outline of structure here, is uncontested. There is no disagreement about it. There is no need to disagree. It's quite straightforward, and you will easily see reasons for making this kind of an outline. Now, there is another one. There is a feature in Revelation that is so conspicuous that anyone who is wishing to make a case of structure or to structure the book of Revelation will want to make some sort of pattern or some sort of sense out of it. Revelation has a number of sequences of 7s, 7 letters, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, and there is a certain pattern here, and most readers, or at least I'd say the majority of readers, will tend to say that at least the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls have a certain pattern to them. The trumpets and the bowls are very similar. They just diverge mainly regarding intensity. And then you can see that by focusing on these septets, these 7s, we have covered much of the book. We have covered, starting here in chapter 1, verse 7, and then ending here in chapter 22, verse 5. We have covered much of the book by focusing on these 7s. Now, there is one conspicuous sin of omission in this representation. What is it? Well, what happened to chapter 12, 13, 14? People or interpreters who emphasize these septets struggle to find a way to make those chapters in the middle of the book of Revelation fit in here. But just be aware of these septets, these 7s. They are very conspicuous. And the 7th, or the last of the septets, the 7 bowls, run all the way from chapter 15, verse 1. We are quickly done with the bowls. They end in chapter 16. But then the person or the angel that leads John to the or one of the angels that is part of the seven bowls, the seven plagues, is also the one who guides John through the vision of the fall of Babylon and to the new earth and the new Jerusalem and till the very end of the book. So that's why I'm putting I'm making the whole bowl sequence last till the very end of the book. So not much to disagree about there either, even though people will disagree about the meaning of each of these sevens. Now, what happened to chapter 12? Well, something needs to be said about chapter 12, because most serious structurations of the book of Revelation tend to agree that chapter 12 is a pivotal chapter in this book. It is really the hub of the wheel. It is the anchoring point for Revelation's narrative. And you might say, as I try to show here, that the story in Revelation fans out from the book's middle. That's where, in some ways, the story begins with the war in heaven. There was war in heaven, and then this conflict that begins in heaven embroils the earth. And the chapters running from chapter 4 until chapter 12 assume chapter 12. So in some ways we are supposed to feel the influence of chapter 12 on the preceding chapters. The story of what happens in chapter 12 is in some ways implicit and assumed by the previous chapters. We will see this in more detail later, but it is a crucial point, and in this structuration, that's what I wish to bring out. And then what follows chapter 12, that's quite easy to see, is really working out the problem that remains to be worked out after chapter 12. So chapter 12 is the chapter that highlights the cosmic conflict theme of Revelation. And one structuration, then we'll see this as the hub of the wheel. This slide I've shown you before, but I have added a question to it. How to read Revelation and why many don't read it. Because here is a book that claims to be a revelation, meaning that it is a book of openness. It is a book that promises a huge disclosure to its readers, and it is a book that is billed as the climax of prophecy. It is a book that has a universal aspiration. Its implied audience is big. In the beginning of the book, there is a letter to 7 churches, and 7 churches. 7 is a number of completion, and 7 churches could then be that this is a letter intended for all the churches. And then in the middle of the book, there is a message for the whole world that is being proclaimed under the highest of heaven. So Revelation is really wishing to speak to whom it may concern. And Revelation thinks that it has a message that concerns everyone. Now, so why is it that many people have been deterred from reading this book? And I think the answer to that is found here, and maybe mostly here, that the dominant approaches to the book of Revelation have tended to read this book as a book that needs to be decoded. And the code that helps us unlock its mysteries is in some ways not so easy. It is not for everyone to do that. So in my tradition, in my church tradition, where the book of Revelation has been very influential, and where people have done for decades and more, done Revelation seminars and sort of made Revelation part of the church's brand. There have been people who have done this and who have led out in these studies. They have tended to be, what should I say, people who understand the book of Revelation on behalf of the rest of us who don't. So there has been a kind of outsourcing of understanding of this book to a select group of people who are maybe better than the rest of us, more knowledgeable than the rest of us, or simply more bolder than the rest of us, or less concerned about getting it right. They just go out there and they sound like they understand this book, and we are quite happy to have people who understand this book for us. Now, the decoding tendency has been seen, or is seen, in all the major schools of thought, as we will see shortly. Now, so this could be unfortunate for many reasons. It certainly would be unfortunate that some of us will only aspire to understand this book passively. That is to say, listen to somebody else who understands it, like you are listening to me now, and I am pretending that I understand it, and you are quite willing to buy into that idea that I do understand it, and you will not put up much resistance, as it were, because you will think that, well, this takes a lot of background knowledge that I don't have, and so he sounds like he's right, and let's leave it at that. That's quite a risky sort of pedagogical contract, you might say, and I think it has been quite risky and quite unfortunate in my own church tradition that we have had people who understand this book for us. Number one problem with this is that maybe people who understand it for us actually do not understand it well enough, and they kind of, or I put this in rather stark terms, they actually get away with murder because we don't have the wherewithal to question or call their interpretations into question. And then this has led the book of Revelation to be marginalized, and I will show you some examples. So the decoding approach has been dominant. A few people know the code. Most of us don't. We never reach the level where we think we can do this on our own. So we have a few people doing it for us. Now, at the other end of this way of representing it, we have the notion of actualized, that the content, the symbols of the book of Revelation, and here is something I will then assert and I hope to show by and by. The symbols of the book of Revelation are quite simple. They are being illuminated by the Old Testament, sometimes by a little bit of historical knowledge, but mostly they are quite simple, and that we can find ways to see how the reality that Revelation seeks to depict has been actualized in history, in real life, and this will then be somewhat different from a decoding approach. So decoding is a deterrent. I will skip the examples on the right here in the slide, but this is Albrecht Dürer, who was a wonderful German artist around the time of the Reformation, and he made many woodcuts or illustrations for the book of Revelation at a time when readers flocked to this book, thinking that there was something here for them in his day. There is here we are in the 7 seals. There is the white horse. There is a red horse. They are not colored here. There is a black horse, and then there is a very scrawny ashen horse. 4 horses and 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's a very well-known symbol. Now, the various schools of thought have made these horses represent very, very different things, because the decoders could have not quite been able to sort of win the test over what these symbols mean. But if there is a red horse and there is warfare, maybe the horse has something to do with warfare. If there is a horse here that seems to represent famine, maybe it has something to do with famine. It might not be that difficult to see that these are realities that have been playing out in human history, and we will say something more about this in detail. But some of the decoders, they have gone on record to be very specific, saying, for instance, that the red horse represents a certain reality in the church in the run-up to the Emperor Constantine in the 4th century. The red horse represents a period in history and the character of the Christian church in the pre-Constantinian era. Whereas another interpreter, more recent one, seems to say that this red horse represents conditions in the world, what happens in the world in response to the fact that the world has been hostile to the gospel, has not accepted the gospel. Well, I am just mentioning these things to drive home the point that the decoding approach has to many readers been a deterrent to embracing and reading this book and thinking that one can actually read it competently. So we have the challenges I have mentioned before. I need to repeat them. The setting and message of Revelation. There are some problems with the way this book has been read. One is the dominance of the Roman Empire and the Emperor Nero in scholarly interpretations of Revelation, where there has been a strong tendency to prioritize a historical perspective over a cosmic perspective. You have heard me favoring the cosmic perspective. And then here is another of Dürer's illustrations. Here you will see some trumpets. Here is one, there is one, here is another one. 7 trumpets here. And the question relating to the trumpet sequence and other sequences in Revelation is who is doing it? And then you have the challenge of readings that make Revelation the go-to text for a theology of retribution, divine retribution. God is doing it. God is punishing the world. And my caveat here is that you and me as readers of this book, we need to be very careful about the actions that are depicted and determine who is doing it. Are we witnessing divine or are we witnessing demonic action? Needless to say, that will influence our interpretation very much. The scope of Revelation is broad. We have here the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servants John. And then after this, and at the transition point in chapter 4, verse 1, after this I looked, and there in heaven a door stood open. And the first voice which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." So at two crucial junctures in this book, we have the expression, "what must soon take place." And that phrase is a future-oriented phrase, and that has tended to influence readings of Revelation in some unfortunate ways. So we are now getting into the point schools of thought that I mentioned in the outline for today's topics. What did John see? Well, here is a school of thought called preterism. preterism or preterism. That is referring to well, what's preterism? It refers to the past. The opposite is futurism. So the thought of this school is that John is really describing mostly events that belong to the past. He is describing these events as though they belong to the future, but they have actually happened already. Not everything has happened, but most things have happened. So the setting of preterism is mostly then the 1st century, the time of John. And this school of thought became dominant in scholarly circles during the late 19th and early 20th century, and is still the main dominant view. So the main concern of this view is found in John's own time. And so there is something here about the immediate future, but most of it is already past tense. And then here, I mixed up the order of my slides a little here, but here are some books that would be what you might say preterist in their orientation. There is Leonard Thompson's book, the Book of Revelation, Apocalypse and Empire. There is another book here, Unveiling Empire, Reading Revelation Then and Now. There is Stephen Friesen's very competent and very influential book, Imperial Cults and the Apocalypse of John. And there is Christopher Frelingus, Spectacles of Empire, Monsters, Martyrs, and the Book of Revelation. You will see that each of these books, and the last one on the list here, all of them have empire there. There is Revelation and there is empire, and the empire is the Roman Empire. And there are specifics, there are clues to the way the Book of Revelation takes on and critiques and in some ways exposes the villainy of the Roman Empire in the 1st century. And so should we agree with this perspective? Well, I wish to speak not just critical about it, because the theological messages that these interpretations bring from their reading actually has much to commend it, and I am not I do not wish to discourage you from acquiring one or more of these books. Thompson's book is very influential, Friesen's book too. Those are maybe the easiest to read, and they bring much that is worthwhile to the table, where there is abuse of power, where there is a mixture of religion and politics that in some ways is timeless. And even though they focus their study on the constellation of religion and politics in the Roman Empire and its abuses, its attempt to delude the citizen, as it were, those interpretations can have a lot to say to us who might be exposed to similar forces, even though these readings do not think that Revelation is speaking directly to our time. Now, the other school of thought here is futurism. And if preterism is the dominant view today among critical scholars, futurism is the dominant view in the public square, especially in the United States. This is an interpretation that has followed the charismatic movement, what is called dispensationalism, where the Book of Revelation is seen as speaking to the future, to our time especially, or to any time that is that you can say now it is the very end. We are at the very end of time, and the book of Revelation is speaking specifically to us. And so one of the problems in futurism, of course, is that it has had to do resets every couple of decades, because the time that, or what seemed to be the message of this book didn't happen, so well, we need to do it over and find something else. So I claim that this book is or that interpretation, the futurist interpretation, is very shallow. I still think that's the case. But the Left Behind series by Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins have sold 60 million copies in the US. It hasn't made that much of an impact in other countries, but in the US it has been hugely influential. In many churches, and church members have sat through these books and these videos, and in addition to being shallow, it is very violent. Now, these are the interpretations. This is the interpretation that more than anything else retains for Revelation the view that this is a book that does vengeance in a big way, and in an unrelenting way. And God is into violence and really socks it to the opposition. And many politicians, including people who are elected to the US Congress and the Senate, have been influenced by these books. There has in some ways been a triumph of futurism in the US. So there is a third school of thought, historicism. The Seventh-day Adventist interpretive tradition is a historicist tradition, and the distinctive of historicism is also an emphasis on the future, but the line denoting the future here is a longer line. It runs all the way from the time of John here and till the very end, the second coming, the new earth. So the face of the seer here is turned toward the future. And the future is not just our future or our time. The future then is all what is future to John. There is a concern here with historical continuity, so all of the future in a connected way. So you have a kind of comprehensive map of the future in historicism. So this is no longer as influential a view as it used to be. Until maybe the middle part of the 19th century, this was a very influential view. It was not unique to the Seventh-day Adventist tradition by any means, but it has run into some difficulties, and you can easily see it here in my representation here, or two representations of Seventh-day Adventist views of what the trumpets of Revelation are all about. So here is what we might call the old SDA view of the seven trumpets. This is in a book by Uriah Smith, who was a very influential editor and writer in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and his book on Daniel and Revelation was if you Google Uriah Smith and his book on the internet, you will find thousands and thousands of references to it, because it used to be so influential. Uriah Smith thought that the first trumpet represented the Goths, or that the four first trumpets actually represented barbarian hordes that invaded the Roman Empire from the east, and eventually caused the disintegration of the Roman Empire. So here, in rapid succession, or sometimes overlapping, here are these barbarian migrants who come. Goths, Vandals, Huns, you remember Hungary here, Attila the Hun, and here is a fourth group, the Heruli. And these are groups that are represented intentionally by John on Patmos when he sees the trumpets. And then the fifth trumpet and the sixth trumpet to Uriah Smith would be Islam, the rise of Islam in the 7th century, and the Turks here. So you have barbarians here and you have Muslims here. That's it. Those are the trumpets. And that takes us way down till the middle of the 19th century. Now, that view has fallen out of favor in the Adventist view, although some people who wish to be faithful to pioneers, they still will promote it. The new view in the SDA view of the trumpets is very different. Here, the first trumpet points to the fall of Jerusalem. The second one points to the fall of Rome. Third one, the Dark Ages. Well, you look here, in the old view it was the Huns, and now in the new view it's the Dark Ages. It's very different. The fourth one here, still looking at the barbarians, but here we're looking at the Age of Reason. And here you see a kind of subtle transition here, because here are specific historical events, sort of political events, fall of Jerusalem, fall of Rome. Here we're getting more into ideas, aren't we? And here it's all about ideas. It's the Age of Reason. You know, what's the political event here? Well, not much said about that. And then the fifth trumpet is the 18th, fifth and sixth trumpet, I suppose, will be the 18th century to our own time. And the concern here too, in this new view, is mostly about ideas, not so much sort of hardcore political events, which you have, political and military events, which you have here completely dominating the old view. Well, there are two very obvious problems about this sort of shift. The first one is that if the historicist project has the merit of the historicist project is the ability to predict specific historical events and to claim that John had in mind specific historical events, then when you change your view from something like this to something like this, you have an explanatory challenge. You need to explain why you did that, and you have to explain it persuasively. You have to say, well, we thought this before, but now we think this, and you have to do that persuasively. I will say that that criterion has not been met in the book that is on the Seventh-day Adventist market, that is making the case most forcefully for this view. This old view is completely absent. It's like it didn't exist. So it is a little bit the kind of amnesia that you have in regard to past views is a little bit. It's more than unfortunate. It is a sort of what it goes back to what I said earlier, that we have a problem with the decoding approach because some people understand the book of Revelation for us, and somehow readers or students in the classes of those who have made this move have not held the feet of their professors to the fire and asking them to say, well, you need to salvage, if you want to salvage historicism, you really need to make these points extremely persuasive and less vulnerable to change than you have. So historicism has in some ways run into a lot of trouble, has run into credibility problems in our time because it has not successfully met those challenges. The old view, when you see this revision of the historicist paradigm, the old view of the trumpet sequence begins with the fall of Rome, and it ends with events in the 19th century. There is a certain bias for the ending happening at the time of the interpreter of the book. And in the new view, it begins with the fall of Jerusalem much earlier, and it ends with events in the 20th century. But now we are in the 21st century. Actually, the new view doesn't really end in the 20th century, it ends in the 19th century with some of the intellectual challenges, sort of currents of ideas in the 19th century, and some events in the 20th century are still not included. The Holocaust, for instance, has not been seen as, or I haven't seen a single representation in historicism that thought that John could have included that event, for instance. Now, here is a verse, Revelation 1:19, that I would like to commend to you as a verse that aims to show that Revelation intends to be a comprehensive disclosure. Here is what the speaker says to John. Now write what you have seen, what is and what is to take place after this. In these phrases there is a kind of emphasis on the past, what you have seen, what is, emphasis on the present, and what is to take place after this is a statement about future things. Some people, many people, have read this verse as though it is an outline of the book of Revelation. What you have seen is what John has seen up to and maybe including chapter 1, verse 19. What is John's message, or the messages to the 7 churches. And what is to take place after this is most of the revelatory section beginning in chapter 4, verse 1. So there is this possibility that John is here talking about the outline of the book. But there is another interpretation, I think a better one, and that is that John hasn't just seen the future. He hasn't just seen, when he writes his message, he hasn't just seen the things that are contemporary to him and things that have not yet happened. He has actually seen the whole story. He has seen the conflict between good and evil. He says it began in heaven. He has seen that battle playing out. He has seen how the earth became the battlefield for the conflict between good and evil. So when the angel tells John to write what he has seen, what is and what is to take place after this, he is really thinking in comprehensive terms. It's not just a compositional outline. I think that is an important point, and you can read more about it if you look at the chapter I have done on method in Revelation. You will see more about it. That's in the book Saving God's Reputation. So what did John see according to this view? And by the way, the view I am proposing to defend here is not an ism. It isn't preterism. It isn't futurism. It isn't historicism either. It is a cosmic conflict view, where the narrative of Revelation is really giving us what to call it. And the narrative of Revelation is the narrative of the cosmic conflict, from the beginning of that conflict to its end. So in the cosmic conflict perspective, there is a timeline. There is a sort of historical progression from past to present to future. But there is also a scope that is beyond or that rises above history only, because there is a concern with cosmic reality and all of history. Do you see that? So I do wish to extricate the book of Revelation from the damage done to it by readings that have taken it hostage, whether it be preterism and its concern for Roman Empire realities, futurism, which is whatever some people in our time think fits their basic, what should I say? I have to say this carefully, some of their political biases perhaps. And then there is historicism that has run into some risks, and we have illustrated the problem that historicism has had with regard to the trumpets. Now, is there a risk here? Not really, because we are just following the narrative flow of the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation leaps back and forth. It doesn't just look relentlessly at the future. It leaps back and forth between past and present and future, and it seeks to illuminate and help us understand the present and the future in light of cosmic conflict imagery and cosmic conflict realities. I, John, the historical setting, then we are now leaving that subject behind. Historical setting of John, what was it? John says in chapter 1, verse 9, I, John, your brother, who share with you in Jesus the trying circumstances and the kingdom and the patient endurance, was on the island called Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. So what do we learn from here? We have a person who calls himself John. That is a giveaway, not necessarily for us to enable us to know who that actual author was, although I will have a little bit to say about that in our next lecture. But someone who says, I, John, your brother, is likely to be known. He is likely to be well known. He is likely not to be someone who needs a lot of introduction for him to be known by the original readers. So we should probably see him as a very well-known person to them, at least. And then there is a mention of trying circumstances, and then there is the island of Patmos off the coast of Turkey, where he is either, or most likely, in exile because of things that were happening in the Roman Empire, or there is also the possibility that he could be on Patmos in order to receive his revelation because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. Was that because he was suffering for that word, or was it because he was there to receive it? Well, most likely there is a notion of suffering here. The Roman Empire during the reign of Augustus in this map, by the time of the end of the 1st century, the empire has grown somewhat into Great Britain, I believe, but you see that it covers lots of Europe. It covers all of North Africa, of the inhabitable part of North Africa. Here in present-day Tunisia, here is the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Also here to some extent in Syria, breadbasket of the Roman Empire. And then in the 2nd century, the Roman Empire will grow into a little bit more into the Arabian world, or not, it wasn't Arab world in those days, but there it would grow into to compass Iraq, for example, in the early 2nd century. And John is here off the coast of Turkey on Patmos in this area. But the question has been raised, and I need to let you in on that. The question has been raised. Now, was the church persecuted during the time of John? The most widely held view of the time of the composition of this book is that it happened during the reign of the Emperor Domitian, who was the last one in a line of Roman emperors in the 1st century. And he is usually depicted as a very bad person, a grandiose person, as someone who claimed divinity, divine status, and wanted to be worshipped in ways that his predecessors had not done. So in the traditional view, Revelation is a response to a known danger. That danger is persecution during the time of Domitian. And the alternative view that has come into vogue by very reputable scholars of late is that Revelation in many ways is a response to an unrecognized danger. And some of the background for this view you will see here. The people who shaped Domitian's reputation were historians who wrote after his time. Two of them, Pliny, here, born in about 60 in the Common Era, he wrote during the time of Trajan, who was the emperor who took power after Domitian. And here is another one, Suetonius, born in 70 CE, who is an adult after the time of Domitian. He writes about Domitian. You can see one of his books is about Domitian. And then there are some other later historians who have written on this subject. Now, common to all of these people is that they take a very bad view of Domitian. So they are making his reputation, they make him out as a real stinker. But can we trust them? Are they unbiased? Do they write history the way we expect history to be written today, with taking both sides of an issue, dealing fairly with the evidence and so on? To what extent are these people historians, and to what extent are they propagandists that actually write history in order to please their patron? Well, you have heard my question is really offering the answer, that these people wrote for their new emperor, and they needed to, one of the ways that they tried to make their new emperor look good and feel good was to write very bad things about the emperor that had preceded him. So they maligned Domitian in order to magnify and aggrandize Trajan. So here is a conclusion here from Leonard Thompson's Book of Revelation, Apocalypse and Empire. It would be a mistake to interpret the Book of Revelation as a response to Domitian's supposed excessive claims to divinity, or to a reign of terror at the end of Domitian's rule. Domitian provided economic and political stability to the whole empire, at least as well as did other emperors at the end of the 1st century and the beginning of the 2nd. So what Leonard Thompson is saying then is that Domitian is a case of posthumous defamation by historians, and that we, or for centuries, people have tended to accept the testimony of historians who are actually extremely biased. Now, this is not to say that there wasn't persecution at the time of John. There was. But, and we have evidence for that maybe in chapter 1, verse 9, when John says he was on the Isle of Patmos for the testimony of Jesus, and we have other instances of persecution in the messages to the 7 churches. Please read chapters 2 and 3 and see for yourself. But here are 2 churches that do not seem to face external dangers. And to the angel of the church in Sardis, write, I know your works. You have a name of being alive, but you are dead. What's the problem here? Is it a problem without or a problem within? It is a problem within. The concern here is not a threat to the church from outside the church, it is a threat to the church from within the church. It's different. Here, the last of the 7 churches, and to the angel of the church in Laodicea, write, the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the origin of God's creation, that's Jesus. I know your works. You are neither cold or hot. I wish that you were either cold or hot. What's the problem here? Is it a problem outside the church or inside? This verse or this message will go on to say that you say about yourself you are rich and increased in goods and have need of nothing. So these 2 churches, the church in Sardis and the church in Laodicea, are not represented as persecuted churches in the least. They are represented as prosperous churches, successful and quite happy with themselves, quite happy with their reputation. This church has a good name, has a name of being alive, but its actual state is not as good as its reputation. And there is a similar problem in the Laodicean church. We'll have more to say about the last of these churches in our next lecture, a very interesting historical things there that resonate with the message of Revelation. So while there might be, or while there is persecution, and there is a problem of persecution in John, it might not be persecution, or at least not large-scale, uniform persecution during the time of John. There is a kind of generic texture to John's interest in persecution. What could be the generic interest? I will not read you the statement from Biguzzi. I agree with it to some extent and disagree with it to some extent. You can read it here for yourself. He is referring to the importance of a statement on persecution in Revelation 6:9-10. But that statement of the voices that cry out for vindication of martyrs that have been slain could be the problem all martyrs in all times have had. Why, God, aren't you standing up for us? Why is there such an apparent discrepancy between what we as your faithful believers expect of you, God, and what you are actually doing? And that could be quite timeless. That could go all the way to the first victim of violence in the Bible, where Abel is slain by his brother Cain, and the blood of Abel is crying out to God from the ground. So there is a kind of not Revelation speaking so much to a specific historical reality, but to a very basic human existential reality, the reality of seeming to be let down by God. And this could give, if we read it this way, of course, then it could have wide applications for us who are working in the healthcare field, and for chaplains who will minister to people time and time again who feel that they are being let down by God. And does the book of Revelation interest itself in that question? My answer is emphatically yes. It does indeed interest itself in that question. So Adela Yarbrough Collins, I will end with her in her wonderful book Crisis and Catharsis. Adela Yarbrough Collins is married to John Collins. I mentioned him in my earlier talk. John Collins is an expert on early or late Jewish and early Christian apocalyptic literature. And Adela Yarbrough Collins has written extensively on the book of Revelation. She teaches at Yale with her husband, and she has now written a huge commentary on the Gospel of Mark. But here is what she says, because she captures that kind of ambivalence in the book of John. There is persecution, but there is not just known danger, there is also unknown danger. Rather than simply consoling his fellow Christians in a situation of grave crisis, he wrote his book to point out a crisis that many of them did not perceive. That errand of the book of Revelation could make this book very relevant to many of us, and not only to people who feel that they know that they are facing hard times. And with that, we will end, and I hope to see you back and be with you again in my fourth lecture.